Hello, this is Tyler Watt here, and we're going to explore a few different ways to solve a quadratic equation. The first method we're going to look into is factoring. It's probably the most simple method, probably the one you're going to be using most often. In order to factor, you need to find two numbers that multiply to get your c value, which is negative 15, and add to get your b value, which is negative 2. In this case, the values would be negative 5 and positive 3. From there, you would set these two values equal to 0, x minus 5 equals 0, and then x plus 3 equals 0, and then just solve for x. So you'll find x equals 5, and then x equals negative 3. The next we're going to look at is the quadratic formula. What's good about the quadratic formula is that you can use it for any quadratic equation. The downside is that it kind of takes a while and probably harder than factoring. So this is a quadratic formula right here. X equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. I'll divide by 2a. Pretty long, right? And then what you just do is you plug in your b values, your a values, your c values from this equation into the quadratic equation. So we have 2 plus or minus the square root of 4 minus 4 times 1 times negative 15 all over 2 times 1. Then from there you would solve inside the radical to find 2 plus or minus the square root of 64 over 2. 64 is a perfect square, so we get 2 plus 8 over 2, and then 2 minus 8 over 2. Since this is a plus or minus, you split it up into two different equations. From there, you simply just solve. 2 plus 8 is 10, divide by 2 is 5. 2 minus 8 is negative 6 over 2 is negative 3. Put a negative right there. And we are all set with the quadratic equation. You get the same answers, but it takes a little bit longer. The next method is probably the very easiest, but it might take a while, especially like on tests. It's graphing. So all you really have to do is plug this equation into your graphing calculator, and you will find that your x-intercepts, your zeros, are negative 3, 0, and 5, 0, the same answers that we got when we were factoring and using the quadratic equation. You'll also find that your y-intercept is going to be negative 15. You see here in the equation that your last number, your c value is a negative 15, and that gives you your y value. And then your vertex is at 1, negative 16. You can either find that through graphing or by using a formula to get the x value, then plugging the x value back into the equation. But this gives you all the parts of the equation. It just probably takes a while. And then the fourth method we're going to look at is completing the square. Completing the square is probably my least favorite method, but still you could always use it. So we've got x squared minus 2x minus 15. You move your c value to the other side, and then what you have to do is you have to put your b value over 2 and then square it. That's going to end up giving you 1. And then you're going to add that 1 to both sides. You're going to have x squared minus 2x plus 1 equals 16. From there, you would put in the parentheses there. This is a, you can, x minus 1 squared is what this equals. And then from there, you would just take the square root of each side. And then you would have x minus 1 equals plus or minus 4, since the square root of 16 can either be positive 4 or negative 4. So you would just set these two equations up, since, it could either be a positive 4 or a negative 4. You'd solve them, you get 5 or negative 3. You get the same answers, but this takes the longest. Completing the square works pretty well with some equations, pretty not so well with others, so it all just depends on which equation you're using it on. And then the last method we're going to look at is extracting the square roots. Pretty simple. This is a different equation we're using now. 2x squared plus 7 equals 23. Take your 7 from both sides. You're going to end up with 2x squared equals 16. From there, you would divide each side by 2. So you get x squared equals 8. And then take the square root of both sides. You get x equals plus or minus 8, which is going to be your answer, since you can't simplify. Well, you could simplify that a little bit further, right? So x equals plus or minus, then 8 could be 2 times 2 times 2. So it would be plus or minus 2 square root of 2. That's like your technical answer in the end. So these are the 5 different ways you can solve quadratic equations. I hope you learned something from this video. All right, thank you. All right, so if I would have to rank these 5 methods from best to worst, I would put them, best would be factoring, all the way down, square root, graphing, quadratic, then completing the square. Factoring, it's easy, it's simple, it generally works the most, usually the quickest. Square roots, also pretty quick. Sometimes you can't use it though. Sometimes you end up with answers that are a little bit difficult to work with, so that's why it's second. Graphing, it's in the middle just because sometimes, it takes a while, but, it always works, but sometimes you have to change the window set. And then quadratic formula is fourth, one of the worst ones, just because even though it works every time, it takes a while, and the formula can be complex sometimes, if you work with negative numbers. And then completing the square is dead last, just because I don't like completing the square, just because, usually there's a much easier way to do completing the square. It should be like a last resort, or if the book specifically says you have to use completing the square to figure out the problem.